Imagine for a moment that you have in your hands a newspaper written 2,700 years ago. You open the first page and find headlines describing events that happened exactly as they were written, but not centuries ago, but just 75 years ago. Events so specific, so detailed, so impossible to predict that any skeptic would have to admit that something supernatural was at play. This is not science fiction. This is not a time travel novel. This is exactly what happened with a man named Isaiah, who lived in the 8th century before Christ and wrote words that were fulfilled with a precision that defies all human logic. But there is one prophecy in particular, a prediction so specific and so impossible that when it was fulfilled in the 20th century, the entire world witnessed a prophetic miracle that had been waiting for almost 3 millennia. Welcome to Be Closer to God channel. Today we will discover what Isaiah prophesied 2,700 years ago is reality today. If this introduction has already awakened your curiosity about what specific prophecy was fulfilled in our days, show your interest by giving this video a like right now. Subscribe to Be Closer to God if you haven't already, and share in the comments what country you're joining us from today. Your participation drives us to continue revealing these prophetic mysteries that can transform your understanding of the times we live in. To understand the magnitude of what we are about to reveal, we first need to know who this extraordinary man was and how his words have resonated through the centuries with a precision that can only be explained by divine intervention. Isaiah ben Amoz lived during one of the most turbulent periods in Israel's history. Born around 740 before Christ, he witnessed the reign of 4 kings, Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah. During his 60 years of prophetic ministry, he saw the collapse of the northern kingdom, the constant threat of the Assyrian Empire, and the political crises that shook his world. But Isaiah was not simply a political observer or a social analyst. He was a man who had had a supernatural encounter that would change not only his life, but the course of human history. It all began in the year that King Uzziah died. Isaiah was in the temple when something happened that defies all human description. He himself relates it. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne, high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above it stood seraphims. Each one had 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, with 2 he covered his feet, and with 2 he flew. And one cried to another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. Isaiah 6:1-3. This was not a vague mystical experience or a symbolic vision. Isaiah saw the reality of God's throne, heard the worship of the seraphim, and experienced divine glory in such an intense way that he thought he would die. But instead of dying, he was purified with a coal from the altar and commissioned for a mission that would change history. When God asked, Whom shall I send and who will go for us? Isaiah responded without hesitation, Here am I, send me. Isaiah 6:8. From that moment, Isaiah became more than a prophet. He became a chronicler of the future, a man who would see events that would not happen until centuries after his death. The prophecies that defied time. First impossible prophecy, the virgin birth. During the political crisis known as the Syro-Ephraimite War, when King Ahaz trembled with fear before the alliance of Syria and Israel, Isaiah pronounced words that seemed impossible. Therefore, the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel. Isaiah 7:14. In an era when virgin births were considered pagan mythology, Isaiah prophesied that the Messiah would be born of a virgin. 700 years later, in a small town called Bethlehem, a young woman named Mary gave birth to Jesus without knowing a man. The prophecy was fulfilled with a precision that left even skeptics astonished. Second impossible prophecy, the named conqueror. But Isaiah was even more specific. In an era when Babylon was barely a minor city-state, He prophesied not only that Babylon would become a great empire, but also who would conquer it and how he would do it. Thus says the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I have held, to subdue nations before him and loose the armor of kings, to open before him the double doors, so that the gates will not be shut. Isaiah 45:1. Isaiah mentioned the name of Cyrus the Great 150 years before he was born. He prophesied that the gates of Babylon would not be shut, and exactly so it happened in the year 539 before Christ, when Cyrus conquered Babylon, finding the gates open because the Babylonians were celebrating a festival. Third, impossible prophecy, the suffering of the servant. Perhaps Isaiah's most detailed and moving prophecy was his description of the suffering servant in chapter 53. But he was wounded for our transgressions, he was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement for our peace was upon him, and by his stripes we are healed. Isaiah 53:5. Isaiah described the crucifixion with detail so precise that he seemed to be present at Calvary. He spoke of a man who would be despised, rejected, who would die with the wicked but be buried with the rich, who would not open his mouth during his trial, and whose death would be a sacrifice for the sins of others. The problem is that Isaiah wrote this 700 years before crucifixion was invented as a method of execution. The Romans had not even conquered Jerusalem when Isaiah described exactly how the Messiah would die. Fourth, impossible prophecy, the second gathering. But there was another prophecy of Isaiah that seemed even more impossible. It shall come to pass in that day that the Lord shall set his hand again the second time to recover the remnant of his people who are left from Assyria and Egypt, from Pathros and Cush, from Elam and Shinar, from Hamath and the islands of the sea. He will set up a banner for the nations and will assemble the outcasts of Israel and gather together the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth. Isaiah 11:11-12. Isaiah prophesied that there would be a second gathering of the Jewish people from the four corners of the earth. The first had been the return from the Babylonian exile, but a second one, after the Jews had been scattered throughout the world for almost 2,000 years. For centuries, this prophecy seemed impossible. The Jews had been dispersed by the Romans in the year 70 after Christ. They had suffered persecutions, pogroms, the Holocaust. How could they return to a land that had been controlled by successive empires for millennia? But then we come to the 20th century, and something extraordinary began to happen. If these already fulfilled prophecies have left you amazed, wait until you hear what comes next, because there is a prophecy of Isaiah that was fulfilled so literally and so precisely in our days that when you understand it completely, your perspective on prophetic times will change forever. Stay connected, because we are about to reveal the most extraordinary prophetic fulfillment of the last 2,000 years. What you are about to hear is not theological theory nor symbolic interpretation. It is documented, verifiable history that happened before the eyes of the entire world and that fulfilled a specific prophecy of Isaiah with a precision that defies all natural explanation. In chapter 66 of his book, Isaiah wrote words that for 2,700 years seem more poetry than prophecy. Who has heard such a thing? Who has seen such things? Shall the earth be made to give birth in one day? Or shall a nation be born at once? For as soon as Zion was in labor, she gave birth to her children. Isaiah 66:8. A nation that is born in a single day. A country that is established instantly. For centuries, Bible scholars wondered how this prophecy could be fulfilled literally. Nations are not born in a day. Countries are not established instantly. Political processes take years, decades, sometimes centuries. But God had a plan that would defy all human logic and that would unfold exactly as Isaiah had prophesied. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, local time in Tel Aviv, a man named David Ben-Gurion stood before an audience at the Tel Aviv Museum of Art and read a declaration that would change the course of history. By virtue of our natural and historic right, and on the strength of the resolution of the United Nations General Assembly, we hereby declare the establishment of a Jewish state in Eretz Israel, to be known as the State of Israel. At that moment, after almost 2,000 years of dispersion, after centuries of persecution, after the horror of the Holocaust, Israel was born as a nation in a single day, literally, exactly as Isaiah had prophesied 2,700 years before. But the prophetic precision did not end there. 11 minutes after Ben-Gurion's declaration, President Harry Truman announced that the United States officially recognized the new state of Israel. 11 minutes. In the history of nations, nothing like this had ever happened. 3 days later, the Soviet Union, despite being in the midst of the Cold War with the United States, also recognized Israel. Within days, nation after nation recognized the legitimacy of the new Jewish state. A nation had literally been born in a day, exactly as Isaiah had prophesied. But Isaiah's prophecy was even more specific. He not only said that a nation would be born in a day, he said that Zion was in labor and gave birth to her children. The word Zion refers specifically to Jerusalem and, by extension, to the land of Israel. And indeed, it was not just any nation that was born in a day. It was specifically Israel, in the land that had been promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob thousands of years before. Furthermore, Isaiah used the metaphor of childbirth. And indeed, the establishment of Israel was preceded by labor pains, 2 world wars, the Holocaust, decades of political negotiations, and finally, the instant birth on May 14, 1948. But the fulfillment of this prophecy has implications that go far beyond a fascinating historical event. If Isaiah could predict with absolute precision the rebirth of Israel as a nation, what other prophecies of his are about to be fulfilled? First implication: the flourishing of the desert. Isaiah also prophesied, "The wilderness and the wasteland shall be glad for them, and the desert shall rejoice and blossom as the rose." Isaiah 35:1. Today, Israel is a world leader in agricultural technology, has turned deserts into gardens, and exports agricultural products worldwide. The desert is literally flourishing. Second implication: Jerusalem as a center of conflict. The prophet Zechariah, contemporary of Isaiah, prophesied, "Behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of drunkenness to all the surrounding peoples." Zechariah 12:2. Today, Jerusalem is the center of world attention, the focus of international conflicts, exactly as it was prophesied. Third implication: the last times. If these prophecies are being fulfilled literally, then other prophecies about the last times will also be fulfilled. The return of Christ, the establishment of his kingdom, the final judgment, everything that seemed symbolic or distant suddenly becomes immediate and literal. God's prophetic clock. Israel has become God's prophetic clock. When Israel ceased to exist as a nation in the year 70 after Christ, the prophetic clock stopped. When Israel was reborn in 1948, the clock began to function again. And since then, we have seen the accelerated fulfillment of prophecies that had remained dormant for almost 2,000 years. The generation that will not pass away. Jesus said, "Assuredly I say to you, this generation will by no means pass away till all these things take place." Matthew 24:34. Many interpret that the generation that saw the rebirth of Israel will be the generation that sees the complete fulfillment of the prophecies of the last times. If this is correct, then we are living in the most extraordinary days of human history. We are the generation that is witnessing the fulfillment of prophecies that were written thousands of years ago. Now you understand why Isaiah's prophecy about a nation being born in a day is so extraordinary. It was not simply a lucky prediction or a historical coincidence. It was the literal fulfillment of words, written by a man who saw the future with a clarity that can only be explained by divine revelation. Isaiah was not a fortune teller nor a mystical visionary. He was a prophet of God who received specific revelations about events that would not happen until thousands of years after his death. And the fact that his prophecies have been fulfilled with absolute precision gives us confidence that the prophecies that have not yet been fulfilled will also be fulfilled exactly as they were written. But more than that, the fulfillment of this prophecy tells us something profound about the times we live in. We are not living in just any era of history. We are living in the days that the prophets longed to see, in the times that were prophesied from the beginning. The rebirth of Israel in 1948 was not just a political or historical event. It was the fulfillment of a divine promise, the activation of God's prophetic clock, and a clear sign that we are approaching the climax of human history. When you see the news about Israel, when you hear about conflicts in the Middle East, when you observe political developments in that region, remember that you are not simply seeing current events. You are seeing the fulfillment of prophecies written thousands of years ago. And if these prophecies have been fulfilled with such precision, then you can have absolute confidence that God's promises for your life will also be fulfilled. The same God who could predict the rebirth of a nation with 2,700 years of anticipation is the same God who has specific plans for your future. If this message has opened your eyes to the prophetic precision of God's word, share this video with someone who needs to understand the times we live in. Subscribe to be closer to God for more revelations that can change your perspective on biblical prophecy. And now, as a declaration of faith in the precision of God's prophecies, write in the comments, "God, help me discern the times." Let this prayer be your commitment to live with prophetic expectation and spiritual preparation. Remember, if God could fulfill his promises to Israel after almost 2,000 years, he can also fulfill his promises for your life. And in his hands, your future is as secure as the prophecies that have already been fulfilled. Until next time, on Be Closer to God.